Gosh, it's good to see all your faces. It's been a while since I've given a talk to this many people, but it's really great to see all of you today. And thanks for joining this session. We're going to go a bit deeper into that last bullet that Nate was talking about, which was deploying EKS in any environment. And I'm Chris Splinter. I'm a product manager on the Kubernetes team, and we also have Leechin.
Hi, everyone. I'm Leechin Lee. I'm the product manager for EKS Anywhere.
And so our goal today is really to go through the Amazon EKS portfolio at a level deeper than what Nate was covering. And so we'll talk about the different options that he was describing in terms of local zones, wavelength zones, when you might want to consider those over other options. We'll talk about Outposts and Amazon EKS Anywhere, and we'll really focus on the use cases and new features that are coming for each one of those offerings. And so you've probably seen this slide a few times today, but I want to dive a little bit deeper into this arrow that's at the bottom, which is a management spectrum. And on the left, we have AWS managed. On the right, we have customer managed. When you run Amazon EKS in AWS regions, we manage that Kubernetes control plane for you. But we also provide other management options for your data plane, your worker nodes, like managed node groups and AWS Fargate. You can also use Carpenter to auto-select some of those instance types for you. And then as you move to the right here, in local zones, wavelength zones, and AWS Outposts, this is where you have to use self-managed node groups at the moment. And so that's why those are on the right of that spectrum of customer managed, because now we manage less of that data plane when you do run EKS nodes in local zones, wavelength zones, or on Outposts. And then there's Amazon EKS Anywhere, which is a customer managed solution. It is AWS supported, and so you can call us if anything goes wrong with it, but at the end of the day, you're using the automation tooling that we'll talk more about in the coming slides to manage your EKS Anywhere clusters on-prem. And underlying all of this, like Nate was describing, is EKS distro, which are the individual components that make up that Kubernetes cluster. But with these components, we still do scan them for vulnerabilities. They're in our CI/CD, and so we are taking care of the validation of those different components across Kubernetes versions. So now diving a little bit deeper into Amazon EKS in the cloud, these are all of the regions that exist today. And so Amazon EKS is available in 27 geographic regions worldwide and 87 availability zones. And whenever we talk to customers about their workloads, we always start here. Always look at the region first, because this is really where you can benefit from the breadth of the instance types, the scalability, the integration with other AWS features. And the regions really are the most feature-rich option for you and will also offer the most scale for your deployments. However, we've heard from customers that they have certain applications that either have lower latency requirements. Sometimes they also need to process data locally to where it's being produced. Sometimes there are regulatory restrictions in place such that they need to host their workload in a specific national border or a specific area. And this is really where local zones come in. And with local zones, you can use many of the same services that you use in AWS in regions, but there are some limitations. And so some of the core services that are available are EBS, EC2, VPC, ALB, but you won't find some of the other services like, for example, the network load balancer. And so if you do need to run in local zones, look into the various services that are available in that local zone, because you need to make sure that what your application depends on is available there. And we've really found that these local zones are a great fit for customers that have like game streaming applications, telecommunication workloads like 5G core, financial services, some social media customers, as well as some customers in the public sector. And now I want to talk a little bit about wavelength zones here. And wavelength zones are for customers who need ultra low latency from 5G devices back to AWS services that are hosted in the cloud. And this is really a strong fit for customers that might have IoT applications or live media production, industrial IoT. And we've also seen customers benefit from wavelength zones when they have either game streaming or AR and VR workloads, and they can reach their end users with millisecond connections. And we have wavelength zones with Verizon, SK Telecom, NDDI in Japan, as well as Bell Canada and also Vodafone. So now talking a little bit about what we're doing to expand into new areas. We've announced plans for 8 new AWS regions, as well as 24 new availability zones, and also 31 new AWS local zones. And so keep your eye out for a couple more local zones that may be launching in Europe later this week, because we've done a lot of the integration testing with those. And as you'll see over the coming months, there'll be a lot more local zones available all over the world. And just to make sure I cover it here, local zones as well as wavelength zones are fully AWS managed infrastructure. So think about the consumption model just like you do in the region, where if you want to deploy resources into a local zone or into a wavelength zone, you create a new subnet in your VPC, and that subnet will kind of look just like a subnet that you would have in an AWS region, except you associate it with a given local zone or a given wavelength zone. And when you deploy EKS nodes into that subnet, it's quite literally the exact same process that you follow when you deploy self-managed nodes in an AWS region. However, in some cases, managed AWS infrastructure might not be a fit. Maybe you require more control over where your physical hardware resides, or maybe you have existing infrastructure investments that you're not ready to get rid of, and so you want to continue using that infrastructure going forward. And so our 2 offerings in the hybrid and edge space are Amazon EKS on Outposts and Amazon EKS Anywhere. And when we talk to customers about these 2 offerings, there's really 3 differentiating factors that we like to use to steer the conversation, because it typically guides a customer towards one option or another. And that first factor is infrastructure. If a customer is open to invest in new infrastructure and the Outpost form factors fit their bill, then we absolutely explore to the fullest the option of moving to Outpost, because Outpost is a family of fully managed AWS infrastructure that you can run in your own data center. However, we definitely have a lot of customers that are like, no, I really like my Dell, HP, Supermicro, et cetera, hardware, and I'm going to continue to use that for the next few years because it's been working for me for several years up until this point. And that's really where EKS Anywhere is an option for them. And Leechin will go into the details of the various types of infrastructure and providers that we have available in EKS Anywhere to run an EKS compatible solution on your own hardware. And the second differentiating factor here is connectivity to the cloud. And one important thing to understand about AWS Outposts is that it's a fully connected offering. It's quite literally an extension of what runs in an AWS region or local zone into your own data center. And in order to facilitate that, it requires a reliable connection back up into an AWS region. And that's how we provide a lot of the management of the underlying services and hardware that reside on the Outpost. Whereas EKS Anywhere has flexible connectivity. You can connect it to the cloud with the EKS connector that Nate was talking about previously, or you could not connect it at all. And we've seen a lot of customers that want to go with EKS Anywhere actually still want to run completely isolated from the cloud in general for a number of reasons, but EKS Anywhere offers that flexibility. And the last factor here is cluster management. AWS Outposts in general is a fully managed AWS offering, including the EKS part of that offering. And so whether you run what we call extended clusters or local clusters on Outposts, AWS is responsible for the availability of that Kubernetes control plane. Whereas EKS Anywhere is a customer managed solution, and so this impacts some of the operations that you have to plan for, whether you go with EKS on Outposts or EKS Anywhere. And just to go a level deeper into the various form factors and infrastructure options that are available for you with these 2 offerings. With Outpost, there's Outpost Racks and there's Outpost Servers. Today, EKS is supported on Outpost Racks, which is a 42U form factor that you would run in a highly connected data center. Outpost Servers are offered in 1U and 2U form factors, and these are more applicable to back offices or factory floors or other environments like that. Today, EKS is supported on Outpost Racks. We're actively looking to support EKS on Outpost Servers, and so you can expect that to be coming soon, later this year into 2023. And then on EKS Anywhere, there's a number of different infrastructures that we are providing with EKS Anywhere. The first that was supported since launch back in 2021 is VMware. We also recently this year added support for bare metal. And in the coming, or actually that was last week, we also announced support for Apache Cloud Stack, which is an alternative virtualization provider that you can use with things like KVM. And in the future, we're also looking to add support for Snowball Edge as well as Nutanix. And so I want to go a level deeper into the deployment options for EKS on Outposts. As I was describing, Outposts require a reliable connection back up into the AWS region. And for Kubernetes, this can introduce some interesting scenarios. And what you see on this slide here are the 7 different knobs that kick in when the connection between the Kubernetes control plane and the worker nodes is severed or goes down. And with extended clusters, we call it that because the Kubernetes control plane runs in the AWS region and only the worker nodes run on Outposts. So that cluster is extended across the wide area network, which is typically a direct connect link or another reliable source. But our customers have told us that that connection between the worker nodes that are running on the Outpost and the control plane that runs in the cloud can go down. And for this reason, we built local clusters, which deploys the entire Kubernetes cluster onto the Outpost to take that network failure domain out of the Kubernetes picture. And so now when your Outpost loses connection back up into the AWS region, that cluster, that Kubernetes cluster on the Outpost is going to continue to run, and you can issue a subset of Kubernetes cluster operations even if your Outpost isn't disconnected to the cloud. So this gives you definitely an angle to strengthen your availability posture for the Kubernetes that you're running on Outposts. And I also do want to call out that even though that control plane is running on the Outpost with local clusters, AWS is still managing the availability of that Kubernetes control plane. So like if you did a test where you go in and delete one of the EC2 instances that powers that Kubernetes control plane, you're going to see that automatically come back up because we're continuously monitoring that cluster that's running on the Outpost. And now I just want to, before I pass it off to Legion here, I want to talk about a few of the use cases that we've seen from customers that are using EKS on Outposts. And the first is in manufacturing. Customers who have manufacturing execution systems that can control some of the operations of the supply line, financial services, trading platforms, as well as some banking applications, telecom, primarily 5G core on the rack, both public and private, and then healthcare applications that need to keep sensitive data on premises, as well as gaming customers who are offering either fantasy or betting services in the US and abroad. And now I will hand it off to Legion to talk more about EKS Anywhere.
Thank you, Chris. So EKS Anywhere actually see adoption interest in very similar industry that Chris has mentioned. So for example, like we work with a customer from the healthcare domain or banks who have to meet regulatory reasons for data residency. They're interested in EKS Anywhere. We have worked with investment firms who run trading applications or even theme parks where they run almost real-time video processing applications, and they need the computer happen right next to a particular location. They also talk to us about EKS Anywhere. But the biggest difference in terms of use cases between EKS Anywhere and EKS on Outposts is 2 use cases. One is in terms of being able to deploy on your existing hardware, so you can maximize the capital expense that you already invested in on-premise. The second use case is for disconnected customers. So for example, we have talked to cruise ships. You know, when the cruise ships are sailing out into international water, you may or may not have the internet connectivity. You still need to have a Kubernetes system that is managing your assets on the cruise ship so your customer can still order drinks. So we have very interesting use cases across the board. Now, since about the same time a year ago, we launched EKS Anywhere first on VMware. And for EKS Anywhere, we actually rely on the Cluster API project, the CAPI project. So each one of these options you see on the slide is actually a CAPI provider that we integrate with. The first one we integrate with is CAPV, the VMware provider. And then since then, we have customer telling us they need to deploy high performance application that needs access to the local hardware, and that's why we launched the bare metal option. And we integrate with the Tinkerbell provider for the bare metal option. And as Chris mentioned, there is one more Apache Cloud Stack option that we released just last week. And this is an option that is great for a customer who are still looking to run the cluster on VMs, but they're looking for a free and open source option. Then Apache Cloud Stack is a great option for that. In addition, it's 2 more systems that we're currently still working on. One is to enable EKS Anywhere on the AWS Snow device family, starting with the Snowball Edge Compute Optimized device. So with that option, customer will get end-to-end Amazon support from the software stack all the way down to the hardware level. Lastly, we're also working with Nutanix to enable EKS Anywhere on the AHV virtualization stack, so that customer with the Nutanix cloud infrastructure can also leverage EKS Anywhere and call Amazon for support under the EKS Enterprise subscription. In terms of the operating system, so we started it with Bottle Rocket, which is the default no OS we included in EKS Anywhere. The difference between these 3 operating systems is really the support aspect. Bottle Rocket is the Amazon developed and fully supported operating system for purposely built for the container applications. And customer will get end-to-end support in terms of troubleshooting all the way to bug fixes from Amazon. With Ubuntu and RHEL, we will provide a troubleshooting guidance as well as configuration guidance. We also run in-house a continuous test with these 2 operating systems to make sure that they work with every single version of the EKS Anywhere. But in terms of official support, especially for things like CVE patches or bug fixes, we do recommend our customer to obtain support agreement from the corresponding vendor. So since the beginning, most of our capability focus on multi-node cluster deployment, but we have heard a lot of customers, especially from the telecommunications space, that told us they need to be able to deploy a small footprint cluster, especially in some of the remote cell sites. And that's why we're working on a feature that is called single node bare metal cluster, where we will allow you to put all of the Kubernetes components, control plane, data plane, etcd, including the CAPI components from Tinkerbell, we'll all put that onto a single server. So this is a feature that we are planning to release in December, and it is currently in private preview. If any of you are interested in trying it out, feel free to talk to us after this talk. Also, we have in the beginning focused a lot of our features on helping you managing a standalone cluster. But as our customer adopt EKS Anywhere for more and more clusters on premise, they need more features that help them manage a large group of clusters. So that's why we have already support a concept called the management cluster, which is just another EKS Anywhere cluster. Now, as I mentioned, EKS Anywhere is relying on the CAPI project, and so we have opted for a architecture where we use Kubernetes to deploy and manage more Kubernetes. So the management cluster basically serves as a long-lived cluster on-premise. It is still something that the customer will need to operate and manage, but it is serving as a local management plane from which you can create more workload clusters where you would host your actual application. We typically recommend our customers to keep the application away from the management cluster and instead deploy your infrastructure systems, such as your monitoring systems or the auto-scaling components that is even meant for the workload clusters, deploy those on the management cluster. Now, if you have been following the EKS Anywhere projects, you will notice that currently the primary mechanism for you to do the cluster lifecycle management is still through the EKS CLI, the EKS Cuddle. So we are currently working on the feature that allows you to integrate your existing GitOps or IC system, such as Terraform, with the management cluster so that you can fully automate all of the lifecycle operations, create, update, delete of all of the child workload cluster directly with your existing CI/CD system. That is also a feature we plan to release in December. If you want to try out early alpha builds, feel free to talk to us after the call. So we are always working on adding more integrations with EKS Anywhere. As Nate mentioned in his talk, we want to give you application-ready clusters. So we fully understand that in order for you to operate a production-grade cluster, you need to have additional critical operational software. You will find a lot of these software in the form of an AWS service if you are running the EKS clusters in the cloud. But what about on-premise? For example, there is no ALB for you to use on-prem. And that's why we released the feature EKS Anywhere curated packages. That's where we want to, over time, release a set of these operational software for you. And the biggest difference between EKS Anywhere curated package and the managed add-ons on EKS in the cloud is the disconnected aspect. So anything that we release in the EKS Anywhere curated packages list is going to be fully functional, even when this is completely disconnected, and you can use them, in most cases, without any connectivity back to AWS, other than the time when you need to first download the assets to install them. And also, you can see from here that some of these software is actually meant to replace the AWS service that doesn't have a presence on-prem. So we released from the beginning Harbor as a local registry for you to use on-premise, since there is no ECR on-prem at the moment, similar to MetaLB, as well as emissary ingress as the ingress controller. So last week, we also added Cert Manager, ADOT, that's the AWS distro for OpenTelemetry, metric server, cluster autoscaler for you to use for the autoscaling. Now you have probably noticed a lot of these are just reputable open source software anyways, so what's the big deal of us releasing them as a feature? The big value here is support, again. So we do take these open source software, grab them from upstream, we make the image, we put it through security scanning. We also test it every time there is a new EKS Anywhere version comes out so that you guys don't have to keep on testing them. And lastly, we sign the specific image we built and put through the testing. So we would only support the image that we built. But as a customer, you can call Amazon as a single shop for support for all of these software that we built and sign under the EKS Anywhere Enterprise Support subscription. And on the far right are some of the areas that we're still investigating, which software is something that is in demand among our customer and what we should bundle next. So if you have any requests or ideas, please feel free to talk to us. With that, that'll be the end of our talk. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, everyone.